Yes, this is LEGO. This is my midi-scale Imperial Star Destroyer named Avenger. In this video, I'll show you around the model and also compare it to some similar ships. The ISD Avenger was featured in Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back. Most notably, it was the ship chasing the Millennium Falcon, and the Falcon also hid behind its bridge in this iconic scene. Avenger is a Class 2 destroyer, so its bridge and turbo lasers are different from the Class 1 versions like the 2019 UCS Star Destroyer. Before we dive into the LEGO model, I've made detailed instructions with pictures to guide you through the build, which you can find on my Rubricable linked down below. Okay, let's talk about the model. It measures 38.7 cm long, 22.6 cm wide and almost 17 cm tall on its stand. It's quite dense with more than 1,500 pieces, and it's also stable enough to be carried and swooshed around. I think the superstructure is definitely the most interesting part of the build, so let's start there. Since the real ship is 1.6 km long, there is a lot of depth and layers to the ship. On the model, I used a lot of half-plate offsets to create this effect, like the front section of the superstructure and also the sides that are extended out because of these roller skate pieces. I used a few clip pieces here and there to create depth and shadow in this area. These smaller sections near the superstructure aren't connected to anything because there was no space, so I made it removable to show some of the Easter eggs. Underneath the superstructure, I had enough space to include two miniature scenes. Here we have a unit of stormtroopers and a Lambda-class shuttle for the Emperor, and on the other side there's a single TIE fighter. I also used 1x1s laying sideways to recreate the iconic Imperial wall decor. Under the superstructure assembly, I included the mandatory pink brick. This build slots into the frame of the ship, and it secures nice and snugly. Once that's on, the triangular section goes on as well, although not as securely. The small sections at the back really showcases the versatility of roller skate pieces, because they can be shoved into anti-studs and used to connect things when brackets aren't available. I used this technique a few times in this build, and this thing slots under the big superstructure. Moving on to the bridge, I managed to add a lot of greebling using the same pieces to get the correct angle. As the Avenger is a Class 2 ISD, the antenna is shorter than the Class 1. I wanted to include a Millennium Falcon at the back of the bridge, but it wasn't possible due to the weird angles of the bridge. In the back, there are the 7 engines of the Star Destroyer. This section was quite challenging to design because of all the angles, and I think the details behind the engines are the least accurate part of the model, mainly because there was no space to replicate the triangular shapes here. If you look closely at the top panels, you can see some rounded studs, so let's move on to the paneling. The top panels are built mostly with snot, which means studs not on top. Most Star Destroyers in this scale are way too thick, which was something I wanted to avoid on this model, so I used panels facing sideways to build the trench area. Unfortunately, I couldn't add greebling in this area because the bottom panels had to be as close to the top ones as possible, but honestly the greebling isn't super important in this area. For the raised sections of the panel, I used a tile with snot bricks to get half-plate offsets instead of using wedge plates like other models. This allowed me to completely remove studs from the panel, which makes the model look much better. Here's a simple cross-section on how the raised sections were built. The front of the ship uses these 1x2 cheese grater slopes to form the pointed tip. On other mocks, the shaping is usually done with 2x3 wedge plates, which have studs on them and have thicker tips than slopes. However, the issue with using slopes is that there is this big gap at the front of the ship, which could technically be filled with this 16L hose, but it would be very unstable. Another issue I faced with this was the long plates that I used here tend to bend when there's only stuff placed on one side, so the tip of the ship would bend outwards and have a huge gap. Underneath the panel, I put a small white rubber band to pull the two halves together, and this is only visible from some angles, so it is a decent solution. The underside of this model is another weak point. There's a huge gap at the front and a lot of studs. I managed to include the hangar bay, but it's not the best looking. I used this 3x2 wedge plate for the underside, but the top uses 1x2 cheese grater slopes, and these two parts have a 2-degree angle difference which caused a big gap in the underside panel. Anyways, here's how the model looks next to the midi-scale Super Star Destroyer. The LEGO set is actually longer than my mock, and it's quite interesting to see the small Star Destroyers next to my big one. The closest set that can compare to my mock is 75394, which I do not own. That set is almost 8 cm longer than my mock, and it costs about the same price. That's all for this video. If you want to build this model for yourself, you can get the instructions on my Rubricable. Feel free to drop your thoughts in the comments below, and thanks for watching.